everyone. Hello, everyone. I'm Jocelyn Miller-Zaitzoff, Executive Director and Healthcare Specialist at The Atlantic, and we are delighted for you to join us for this important conversation about adolescent and young adult oncology this evening. Each year, nearly 1.5 million adolescents and young adults around the world are diagnosed with cancer. These patients, ages 15 to 39, face distinct challenges related to work, health insurance, school, fertility, and emotional distress. Not only does cancer threaten their autonomy in this pivotal time in their lives, but adolescents and young adults also have a unique cancer biology and have not shown the same improvements in survival seen in their older and younger counterparts. Today, we'll talk about how we can bridge this gap in cancer care. Please silence your cell phones, but keep them handy. We encourage you to share your experience here with your social networks, and please use the hashtag AtlanticCancer. Before we begin, I want to thank our underwriter, Servier, for their support of the Atlantic's journalism in this evening. Please join me in welcoming Servier's Executive Vice President of Global Medical and Patient Affairs, Dr. Arnaud Lalouette, to share a few opening thoughts.
Good evening, everyone. It's really a great privilege to welcome you all to this critical discussion, which is focused on supporting adolescent and young adults cancer patients. As mentioned, my name is Arnaud Lalouette, and I am the Executive Vice President of the Global Medical and Patient Affairs at Servier. Cancer, as we all know, doesn't discriminate. It affects individuals of all ages, races, and backgrounds. However, the challenges faced by adolescent and young adults diagnosed with cancer are unique, which is why this conversation tonight, designed to identify gaps and foster solutions, is so important. At Servier, we recognize that our responsibility to patients extends far beyond the development of medicines. We are a unique company in that we don't have shareholders, which we believe allow us to be truly patient-centric. We serve patients directly, their experiences, struggles, and triumphs guide everything we do. Today, we are extremely proud to gather such an esteemed community to engage in critical conversation on how to support adolescent and young adults facing a cancer diagnosis. We hope this discussion allows us to deeply understand their comprehensive needs and, most importantly, act on them. So together, we can build a better, a more equitable healthcare system for this critical patient population. Thank you so much, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Arnaud. And now for this evening's conversation on bridging the gap in cancer care for adolescents and young adults, please welcome Tamika Felder, founder and chief visionary officer of Cervivor and cervical cancer Survivor, Dr. Andrew Kung, chair of the Department of Pediatrics at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, and Molly Smith, filmmaker, writer, and ovarian cancer survivor. Here to lead the conversation is Bhumika Tharoor, managing editor of The Atlantic.
Hi, thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Tamika, Molly, and Dr. Kung. We have a lot to get into today, but don't worry, we will definitely save some time for questions at the end. And let's just jump right in. I'd like to start with you, Dr. Kung, thinking about the age group here. We're referring to patients that are between 15 to 39 years of age. And as we know, there's so many particularities with this age group in particular. Could you talk to us a little bit about the importance of classifying this demographic specifically, and why is that important when we're thinking about care?
I think that when you think about what the age limits are, there's nothing hard and fast about anything that happens exactly at 15 or 39, but really it's a recognition of the fact that this is an age group that is fundamentally different than the cancer patient who develops cancer at an older age, and is different, yet again, than the young child who develops cancer at an earlier age. And so I think the definition of the age range of 15 to 39 is really meant to capture the group of people that have commonalities around the biology of the types of cancers that they develop, but also the unique sort of requirements in terms of how we support patients as they undergo the therapeutic journey. And so the psychosocial considerations, the financial considerations, considerations around independence, sexuality, fertility, are all commonalities across this age range. And so that's really, I think, the underlying factor in terms of why the field came up with 15 to 39 as a reasonable estimation of what should constitute adolescent and young adult cancers.
That's great. And Tamika, you know, just as Dr. Kung mentioned, this age group is at such a precarious position in their lives, and they're kind of reckoning with their emerging autonomy. And I know you have a really powerful story here. Could you share a little bit about what was happening in your life during the time of your diagnosis?
Sure. In 2001, I was working as a television producer in Washington, D.C., and life was great. I had moved from my home state of South Carolina, and I literally was another South Carolinian. And I was really just like, wow, I've achieved the things that I wanted to do. I graduated. I'm working in this career. I'm building towards the goal. And I remember thinking 25 is just so grown. I've got my own place. I'm doing all these things. And now I'll be 50 next year. And I think about it, and I was like, I was a little baby just starting out. But that's what it was. I was 25. I got this cervical cancer diagnosis. The only thing that I really knew was that I didn't want to die. I had more living to do. And so for me, in 2001, there wasn't a lot of support for adolescent and young adults, but we were on the cusp. So by 2003, I got involved with organizations like the Ovarian Cancer Fund, the Lance Armstrong Foundation, and there were really things starting to happen in the AYA space. You know, having something like this now is incredible. But back in 2001, there really wasn't a lot, because I wanted to meet other people who would talk about starting your career and having cancer, dating, sex. These are things that I wanted someone to talk to. And so I had to find my people. And when I did, I really felt a sense of community.
Yeah, well, speaking of a sense of community, Molly, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. You know, when you're reckoning with a diagnosis like this, it can feel so isolating. And for this age group in particular, you know, there's studies that show that it's really important to have a community around you, and how that benefits treatment. Can you talk about your experience when it comes to community and treatment and after?
Yeah, I think one of the first things that I did after I was diagnosed at age 21 was I went to TikTok, and social media was the main form of community support from other young adults dealing with cancer. I think that's kind of not often thought of as a community, but it really should be. And then I was lucky enough to, due to university medical leave policies changing the day before my diagnosis, I was able to stay enrolled and take the minimum number of credits, stay in my dorm, and that support, my university community, was critical.
Right, and it must be so difficult to find people with that share your diagnosis, either close by or around in the country. Can you talk about your experience there, finding someone who, or just finding camaraderie or community, like, so you can talk through things?
Yeah, I made videos on TikTok about my experience, and I decided like 4 days after I was diagnosed that I wanted to be public about it on social media. And that was the best decision because other people started reaching out to me. And this girl reached out to me on Instagram and said, hey, I have the exact same diagnosis as you. I'm in college. I'm the same age as you. Let's talk. And that support was life-changing. And now we're really good friends.
Right. When we're thinking about treatment and facilities, I'm curious, Dr. Kung, do you feel like hospitals or treatment centers are optimized or equipped for this specific age group?
I think that one of the things we try to do in our medical center is to facilitate some of the peer level connections that Molly just referred to, because I think that that is a mode of support that this age range really draws upon. And especially as you think about adolescents, young adults, as they're surmounting their own independence and moving away from the family unit as the primary source of support, it's increasingly important to have that peer level support. And so we have within our institution a lounge that allows patients in the AYA age range, when they come in, to use that as their waiting area. And so they have the opportunity to sit side by side with someone their age, maybe not necessarily the same disease, but at least going through the same sort of experience. We have an app that helps make those connections. And, those things we're doing within our institution, but certainly there are increasing venues to do this on a national level that I think represents resources that really didn't exist 10 years ago that are quite powerful.
Right. And Tamika, you've talked about how this diagnosis really changed the trajectory of your life. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. When you were just talking about social media, we all know social media is a wonderful thing because you can instantly connect to people. Social media also can be a fire dumpster because you can connect to people and people can share whatever they want. But I love that you can just post on social media, whether you're a patient, a caregiver, or whomever, and say, hey, I have this patient, this is what happened, and you can connect them to a vast group of support. I mean, I have people that I've never met in person who supported me. How powerful would that have been 20 years ago, 10 years ago? So it's been incredible. So for me, when I first was offered a support group, and I was at a great facility, medical center, but the woman who had cervical cancer was a great grandmother. She was wonderful. She was sweet, but we didn't have anything in common. I was a single woman navigating dating, navigating the loss of my fertility, and trying to figure out how am I going to move forward, and being depressed and everything else. So it was really, really hard. And I had great people around me, but when you have that peer-to-peer support, there is truly nothing like it at all.
Right. Molly, can you share a little bit about, during your treatment as someone who very recently went through this, where did you notice some of the gaps for you, like in your specific, in this age demographic as, being an AYA?
I mean, every single time that I went to an appointment, I was the youngest person in the room. And so that is, uncomfortable right off the bat. But I think even though I was at a hospital with so many resources and incredible care, I still was not connected to those resources quick enough. It took almost a year for me to find out that there even was a support group. And I think had I known that earlier, that would have helped a lot. I ended up joining a support group through the university, but it was just a broad medical issues group. And I wanted to connect with other people going through cancer. So that was definitely a gap that I saw. But yeah, I think as well, just dealing with hair loss and trying to figure that out, hair loss and head coverings and that whole process, it's not really, they're not talking about that with the interest of young people in mind a lot of times. Like head coverings are not really attractive, like sometimes. And there are cute ones. We just have to like find them. And so I was going to TikTok for that information. So that was definitely a gap. And I wish that somebody at the hospital that I was at would have come to me and shared more resources.
I want to go back a little bit and talk about things from the diagnosis period. This group, the AYA demographic is, as we've talked about, unique in so many ways. But often cancer isn't the first thing that comes to mind when a young person comes in to a medical office, which can at times cause a delay in diagnosis. And Dr. Kung, I'd love for you to share your experience with this. And is it your experience that there are delays in diagnosis, and what are ways that we can kind of close that gap?
I think this is an age group where we definitely see delays in diagnosis as potentially a contributor to why outcomes are not what they should be. And I think that the first step in overcoming this is really events like this and other events to raise awareness. And as an example, you brought up Lance Armstrong, and after Lance Armstrong's diagnosis, there was a campaign to really try to push people to do testicular self-exams. And that actually did help move the needle in terms of at least destigmatizing, such exams. And so, I think that awareness and really bringing out that if things aren't right and that illness has gone on a little too long or there's some weird symptom, young people don't have their moms and dads looking over their shoulder saying you need to go to the doctor. You need to be an advocate for your own health and really go seek that medical care if there's something out of the ordinary. And this applies not just to cancer, but to all sorts of other medical conditions that, this is an age group that probably tends to try to tough it out a little too long. And so I think raising awareness is the first step in overcoming this.
Tamika, you were talking about, being a 25-year-old and facing this diagnosis. Can you actually tell us a little bit more in detail what that experience was like for you and getting to the actual diagnosis?
Well, my friends were starting their careers. I was starting my career. My friends were getting married. They were having children. And here I was setting up, weekly appointments for my chemo, for radiation. And I remember two of my friends, they came to visit me and they wanted to go to the mall. And I didn't have the energy to go to the mall. I'm a former shopaholic. And I remember one of them being so upset that I just couldn't keep up in the mall. But even once you finish treatment and you need time for the chemo to run through your body is so depleted from everything else. And people just don't understand. So being 25, I would say it was isolating. It was very lonely. But, once I found community. I remember the first time I went to a young adult cancer event and there were people there sharing their port scars. And even though I didn't have a port, I was like, this is it. This is my community, which is why TikTok and other social media is so powerful, because it's the vulnerability of showing what's happening, what's going on. You're not just reading a pamphlet or listening to one of your, care providers. You're seeing firsthand what people are going through. So the thing that was probably hardest for me was really, I wanted to meet someone else who was 25, who had survived it, who had been in a successful relationship, who had survived wanting to be a mom, but not becoming a mom. So there were a lot of things for me that I felt like I just need to see someone else who's doing well. So yeah, Lance Armstrong really was that beacon of hope for me. And it was really great. And since then, so much has happened in the AYA, community. You still have a long way to go, but there's been incredible gains since I was diagnosed way back in 2001.
Well, that's really encouraging to hear. Actually, could you share some of, and I'd love to also hear about Cervivor and, where you've seen and also built some of these bright lights for people?
Yeah, and so my organization, Survivor, Cervivor, really is a direct reflection of being a part of the AYA movement. When I was with the President's Cancer Panel, where I met Lance Armstrong and Dr. LaSalle, this was a pivotal time for cervical cancer. I was diagnosed in 2001. First HPV test wasn't FDA approved to 2003, and then the HPV vaccine in 2006. So this really was a time where people were talking more and more about cervical cancer, but there was a lot of misunderstanding. So with my TV background, I said, we've got a marketing problem here. We have all these great therapeutics. We've got all this great technology, but yet people seem to think this won't happen to them. Where are the patients? We need to see patients. We need to see that cervical cancer, one, isn't an easy cancer, and that it can happen to anybody. It doesn't matter where you live, what color you are. All this cervical cancer doesn't discriminate. Do we have health equity gaps? Absolutely. But it really is that something someone needs to see. So my organization, one, was for very selfish reasons. I did not want to be the only one. And it really has evolved into something much, much more, because I just knew that, one, I needed to share the story. I needed to meet other people. And a lot of people thank me for the organization, but I really have to thank them because they helped me heal from this trauma of cancer. And cancer should really be looked like as a trauma. And so the last thing I'll say, because I know I'm getting long-winded here, is that I want people to know that cervical cancer can be eliminated, eradicated. We have the tools to do so. But I also want people to never feel alone, because I felt very alone. So the organization stands so that people won't feel alone. The organization stands so that we can train people to tell their stories in a very effective way so that it mirrors the science. But also, I do really thank Dr. LaFalle, who sadly is no longer with us, and Lance Armstrong, because at that meeting in Texas in September 2003, they said, I remember crying, and I said, I just want to help in some sort of way. And they were like, you can help, you can do something about that. And Survivor was born.
Thank you for sharing that. We all know, we know of the healthcare system at times being difficult to navigate, can feel like a bit of a labyrinth. Molly, can you share a little bit about your experience from diagnosis to treatment and what that was like for you?
It was a really scary process, especially because I was doing so much of it alone. My parents were in Florida. I was in school in Connecticut. So those initial appointments, I was calling my mom in to the visit. And I think as well, we really struggled with diagnosing my cancer. It manifested in this very strange symptom of my hands and feet just going numb one day, which led to neurologist visits, and we found it on accident. And so I think there were a lot of moments where my outcome would have been very different had my mother and I not pushed for answers. And it's due to our advocating for ourselves and me learning how to advocate for myself that I am here today.
That's great. Yeah. Speaking of treatment and ways to potentially eradicate cancers, one thing that's essential to that are clinical research trials. And Dr. Kang, I'd love to hear from you. You know, this group in particular, it's less likely to participate in clinical research trials. Can you share a little bit about why that might be and ways that maybe we could potentially increase that engagement?
I think there's two barriers to clinical trial entry in this age range. One is structural and by fault of ours on the medical community side, in that many times clinical trials are constructed with age cutoffs, 18 and above only, or up to 18, and that's rather artificial. The FDA now has said this doesn't make sense, and we as a community likewise are trying to now approach things more through a biologically driven approach. And so increasingly we have clinical trials that cut across this age range. And so I think there are a greater number of clinical trials available to patients in this age range. But the second really is a willingness to participate in those clinical trials. And that's something I think that we as a field should really try to better advocate for, and also better educate patients what the benefits are in terms of participating on clinical trials. Because many people, not just in this age range, but across all ages, when faced having to make a decision like this in the setting of just having heard you have cancer and just having heard, you know, the treatments may cause these side effects, just want to move on. And the understanding that, well, by participating in this clinical trial, you will get the best possible treatment, but you also contribute to making sure that outcomes for someone in the future with the same cancer that you have now may actually be able to do better. That is something that I think we should be more forceful about enforcing and educating about, because these are never easy decisions to make, especially in the setting of all the other stressors that the patients are facing.
Speaking of education, one part of treatment, or even before treatment, that's essential, is talking about fertility preservation. And Tamika, can you share a little bit? You mentioned this earlier. Can you share more about the importance of those conversations and what your experience has been like?
Yeah, those conversations are vital. They are part of your quality of life beyond cancer. Whether you want to be a parent or you don't want to be a parent, there are conversations that need to be had. And so when I was diagnosed, I wasn't ready to be a parent, but I knew at some point I wanted children. And so when my cancer came and I found out the only way to save my life was to have a radical hysterectomy, followed by chemotherapy and radiation therapy, I was devastated. And I threw myself into patient advocacy and this organization that I built. And I told myself, Oprah's not a mom. I don't have to be a mom. But the truth is, I wanted to be a mom. And I thought, okay, so my legacy in life isn't going to be the lives that I birthed, but it's going to be the lives that I saved through this organization. Now, some of you know, a year and a half ago, through a remarkable gift, I became a mom through embryo donation and surrogacy. And I have a beautiful, wild baby boy, Chayton Lennox, aka the Survivor baby. And I love him, and we share no DNA, but he is very much my child. If you meet him, you know exactly what I mean by that. He is me and I am him, and that scares me. But too often, we're not having these conversations with patients. We're not really preparing them for the cost of it. Working with the Alliance for Fertility Preservation and many others, we're changing the laws in different states to protect parenthood for adolescent and young adult. The state of Maryland denied me, and I was forever mad at them and my insurance at the time that I would not be able to have a biological child. And so it was bittersweet, like a clinical trial. It didn't work for me, but it will work for future generations. Fertility preservation is an absolute right for everyone. And we must make sure that we have these conversations and that patients, again, whether they want to be parents or not, they have the information, the support, and the resources to make that. And, I'm happy that even very much later in life, I was able to become a mom, but, it doesn't negate the feelings of losing my fertility and the system letting me down.
That's true. And congratulations on motherhood.
Thank you.
Molly, I'm curious, and I'd love to hear more about Mission Mariposa. And can you say the idea behind it and the work that you're doing currently?
Yeah, so Mission Mariposa is a project that just launched this May. It is an idea that I developed through making a lot of TikToks. And I realized that there is a very robust and beautiful and powerful AYA cancer community online. It's just kind of fragmented and sometimes hard to reach. And so with Mission Mariposa, we want to be that central space where people can share about their experiences, share resources, education, and talk about some of those aesthetic questions about hair loss and eyebrow loss and all of those things that medical systems aren't necessarily answering. And so that is kind of the idea, and we are working together. I have an amazing group of 4 people, all cancer survivors in the AYA community, that are building this project.
That's incredible. Congrats to you. One thing that we've seen lately is that cancer rates within this group among adolescents and young adults are rising. Dr. Kung, why might this be? And what is important for oncologists and the medical community to know to address this statistic?
Yeah, this is, I think, a very important point to recognize that of all age groups, childhood cancer rates have stayed steady. Many adult cancer types that are due to exposures, the rates are actually decreasing. And these are the preventable types of cancers. So the decrease in smoking has impacted lung cancer, et cetera. This middle age group, the AYA age group, is the only age span in which cancer rates have been increasing. And over the sort of 2 to 3 decades between 1970s until the 2000s, for example, the rate of AYA cancers actually increased 30%. Now, the types of cancers that are increasing most within this age group are colon, thyroid, and reproductive cancers. And so the suspicion is that it is some sort of exposure. But the current research has not really nailed down specifically what it is. And, there's a lot of questions around many new things that we're being exposed to, but unfortunately we don't quite yet know what the causes are. In some instances, for example, with the colon cancer, if you look down at the genes, at the DNA changes are exactly the same as older onset colon cancer. And so the suspicion, again, is that it's earlier exposure to something.
Well, hopefully we can make some strides in that clinical research space so that we can get some more answers there. We're going to get to audience questions in just a minute here, but something that I think is important is to kind of end with a little bit of optimism. So I'd love to hear from the 3 of you, what is working well when it comes to AYA cancer care, and what are the things that we should be doubling down on and emphasizing? And I'll start with you, Molly.
Well, first of all, I had an incredible doctor, Dr. Elena Ratner, absolutely an incredible woman. And she was able to tailor my chemotherapy to my exact situation. And I also received a laparoscopic robotic surgery, so I was able to walk around in 5 days. And within 6 weeks, I was fully recovered and back to dancing, which is pretty incredible.
That's wonderful. That's great to hear. What about you, Dr. Kung?
Well, I think that just the fact that this symposium is happening is a sign of success in terms of the increasing recognition of the importance of AYA cancers. I would say also, just from a medical point of view, there have been some home runs. And as an example, we have a understanding now that there are certain types of young onset cancers that result because of a heritable condition, and a heritable condition in which there's increased breakage of DNA. And in those settings, it turns out that the cancers that arise in young people are sometimes entirely curable with the use of immunotherapy. And so there was a recent trial led by Memorial Sloan Kettering looking at a cohort of patients with early onset colon cancer with these heritable defects in DNA damage repair, where immunotherapy alone, no chemotherapy at all, resulted in 100% cure. Now, this represents a very small sliver of the pie, but I think it is paradigmatic of how, if we can understand the biology of why these cancers are happening at a time that they shouldn't be, not that cancer should ever occur, but maybe we can actually come up with therapies that are actually tailored, that are more effective and less toxic.
Great. Thank you. And Tamika?
Yeah, I think, again, having events like this, there are amazing organizations out there that are doing great work, and they've been doing it for some time. We have more organizations, more people doing more stuff. We have to keep having these conversations. We have to not only hold our policymakers accountable, but our clinicians who we love. We have to make sure they understand that this population is very unique and need the support. And I think we just keep moving, seeing where this community is from 2001 to now is very awe-inspiring to me. I mean, we have conferences that are just for young adults who've been diagnosed with cancer. I mean, I feel like I've aged out of it, but I went for many, many years. But I just think that's wonderful. Yeah, let's just keep making sure that this isn't lost in the cracks.
That's great. Would love to jump to audience questions. If you could just, I think, raise your hand and announce your name would be great.
I just said I don't need a mic. Marielle McLeod, South Carolina. I just want to say it's more of a comment than a question. I am an AYA colon cancer survivor, of all things. I was diagnosed at 36 as stage 3B. By complete accident, I'm a completely sporadic case. I just want to applaud you on talking about the importance of peer support. I am the director of a national peer support pan-cancer organization, and when I was going through my personal cancer treatment and journey, I had no idea that such things as peer support existed. It was not until I was done with treatment when I stepped into fully the advocacy space and I started working for nonprofit cancer organizations that I found out that these things existed, and I was livid because I was like, I wish that I could have been able to connect with someone to tell me that I was not going insane, that my symptoms were par for the course, and that this too shall pass. I want to say that, being in the peer support space now, I'm very intentional on the reach out that we do to our community, especially the AYA, because we are so overlooked. And oftentimes we have to go to multiple doctors for them to take us seriously, thus leading to the later staging diagnosis. But I just want to applaud y'all for shining a light on a space that is so overlooked, that I love, helping patients and survivors thrive in. And the reason why we age out of AYA is because we're actually thriving and surviving. So I appreciate you.
That's great. Any other questions? Oh.
Hi, I'm actually a friend of the host here. My name is Sophia, and as a future primary physician, this question's kind of more for you, doctor, and if anyone else wants to comment. But what's the conversation I can have with young adolescents, patients that come in who are not of age, their parents are hovering over them, they're scared? How do we have this conversation to encourage them that the resources that you wonderful ladies have, made a part of the community available? But what are we supposed to say to kids? These are trials they can take part in, and to eliminate that fear, and then bring the parents into it, to give them a little bit of autonomy, and then include their parents. What does that conversation look like? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. I mean, I think the conversation goes as many of the conversations that we have with adolescents go, which is that you have to respect their autonomy by having that conversation first with them. And whether you're a primary pediatrician / adolescent doc talking about sexuality or sexually transmitted diseases, or drug use, smoking, you always have to respect the individual, the adolescent, the young adult, and have that conversation first. And I would say that we tried to do that also as oncologists, and we should. The law says that actually adolescents and even older children have to assent to treatment on clinical protocols, but we still generally tend to approach it as a afterthought as opposed to the primary conversation. And so we very much, at least in the way that we practice, try to directly speak to the teen and really get them on board first. And I think that's the proper approach, rather than have them be brought in as an afterthought.
That's great.
And can I say something?
Please,
to that?
yes.
And I don't think you can eliminate fear. When you hear those words, you have cancer, I don't think there is much you can do to eliminate the fear. I think what you can do is offer comfort, offer compassion, and provide as best as a plan that you can to rid them of the cancer. And notice that I didn't say the word hope. And it's not that we shouldn't have hope. I just think when you initially hear those words, you're not thinking about the rainbows and unicorns. You're just thinking, okay, 1, you're shell-shocked. 2, how can I survive it? And how am I going to get through this?
This has been such an illuminating conversation. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you. More to come.